With my document ready to go, I hate the white background color. Now, it's generally recommended that you never rely on the stage color as being the color for your project. You should always put a piece of artwork down to be the stage color, to be the color that you want, because otherwise Flash loads as a default transparent. It takes the color that's specified by the HTML document that loads the Flash file when it plays in the web browser. So if I fail to put background artwork here and I decide to put a nice neon green background, even though I hoped that my stage color would show up as, say, black, then I would have a problem because it would show up as neon green. And if I had neon green text that was supposed to look all nice and shiny and bright on my black background, the green on green would then fail. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind, that never rely on this background color, the stage color, as the color for your project. You should always put something down to be the color that you want. So if I want a black background, I should then put in a black rectangle. Now, doing that, I can then specify its location. I drew it, and I was sloppy with where I drew it intentionally because it's easier to get it precisely positioned if I put my X at 0, my Y at 0, my height at the width of my project, or my width at the width of the project, and the height at the height of the project, and then now it fills it perfectly, and now I know that. I will have a black background no matter what color. So my stage color is now blue, but it still shows up as black. So I have this black background occurring. Now, if I want to make some nice movie credits, so I have a good title sequence, all of your projects should begin with a title sequence that puts a title of this is what the animation is. It should have your name, give you credit for it. It should put something in to make it a complete project. So it's not just a little short where we just see the animation. We should get something to establish it. So a common way to do that is go grab yourself the text tool, go choose a font of your choosing, and then you can decide what font you feel like for the day. There's certain fonts that, as we talked about on your poster project, that should be avoided, such as Comic Sans, Papyrus, and some of these other very obnoxious sorts of things. So I'm going to go with Gilsan Ultra Bold. I'll choose a nice bright color, going back to that neon green. I already know I want it to be centered ahead of time. And with Flash, we have classic and TLF text. TLF text makes the text in your project a little bit bigger, or it makes your Swift file a little bit bigger because there's a little extra Swizz file that has to be downloaded and kept with your Swift file that keeps the font information. TLF text allows you to do multi-column, multi-box, so that you can have text wrap from one text box to another as you would set up in, say, InDesign, where you would have text connected between boxes. That's a nice feature. It also allows you to do multi-column text and cool things like that. So if you're making your text work with multiple languages, you can dynamically change the font to represent a new language on the fly, go left to right, right to left. It gives you a lot more options. But if you don't need any of that, if you're just doing basic text, then you should stick with classic text. And that's going to give you then the best result. I know that 12 is probably a little bit smaller than I want for my title, and now I can click on stage here and go the best movie you have never seen. There we go. So now I have the title for my text, or for my movie. I can position that until it's nicely put on screen. And if I want to animate this, so I can animate in my title, I will accomplish that by converting it to a symbol. The symbol type of preference for doing most animation pieces is going to generally be the movie clip, so I will want to right click on this, or while it's selected, hit F8 on the keyboard, and I can then choose convert to symbol, and I can now name this as my title, And now we can see if we check over at the library, it now exists as a movie clip symbol over in the library. And if I want to animate it, I can say create motion tween. And now typically if a very common technique would be to have it fade in and then fade out. So at this point, what I can do is go back to the beginning, and with this selected, we're going to modify its color effect. Now, if I'm animating this over an image, then I may want to animate using alpha. Alpha is transparency. If I'm animating this just over black, I will actually get better performance if I select brightness. Brightness allows you to move it from black to white. So brightness works really well if I am going to be animating over black or over white, or or a grayscale color, and that's a good method for doing it. But if you're going to be animating it over an image, over a color or something like that, and want it to fade in, then alpha would be your choice. So in frame 1, I'm not going to set it at 0, because when I set it at 0, I can't see that anything's there. I can't find it. I have to click on it, so I have to look in my layers, and it's like, where is it? A general good practice is you start at 10%. 10% allows you to see it just barely, so you can just barely see what's going on. And then from that point, then you can animate it up to, say, 100%, and we get this nice transition. Now you may notice that the black square I put down to represent my background is only showing up in frame 1, so I do need to extend that out, so I can just click in the timeline, hit F5 on the keyboard, that extends it out. I'm also going to just lock that layer so I don't accidentally select it or do anything. Now we can see, ooh, it fades in. So it fades in over the course of 1 second. And then if I want it to stay for about a second, I can click further out in the timeline, hit F6 on the keyboard, that adds another keyframe. And then if I give it about another second to fade out, I can hit F6 for this final keyframe, click on it, modify the alpha back down to 10%, and oh, I forgot to move my playback head. Move to the very end. And now modify the alpha down to 10%. And we can see that it fades up, stays, fades out. I can add the black, and at that point I want to fade out and stay black for a little while before we bring anything else up, so I will now just hit F5. So we can see that we have this nice fade up, fade out. So it gives a nice, and from 10% going down to 0 is generally a pretty smooth transition, so that's a decent amount to go. But the only ever fading things out to 10% does allow you to see them on screen, so you're not left wondering where is it, what is it. So it's just a good technique. Between 0 and 10% is generally negligible in terms of the visual impact that you see, so that's why that works out to be a decent amount. Now, I can't remember if we've looked at them before or not, but something else that we can apply to objects, because this is a nice fade. What we're going to look at next with my name is we might try not just doing a fade, but we could do a fade with a blur effect, so it kind of fades in from a blur, which is kind of fun. So I'm going to now add another layer, and on this layer put some text, and I'll put my name. So I can put my name here. F8, convert to symbol, my name. And we know that it needs to take effect further out. Now there's a number of ways that I could then kind of adjust the timing here to get it so it starts further out. I could drag, click, and highlight the whole thing by double clicking on it, so I can drag that whole chunk over and then convert it to a tween and add in my keyframes and do all of that. I can add a keyframe at the end here then click back on the beginning part, delete the object. So there's any number of, and there's just navigating through the timeline in Flash is really just something that you just start coming up with methods that work for you and don't make you grumpy in the process, and that usually works out to be the best way to do it. And I do emphasize it's what makes you not grumpy in the process is generally the best way, because the way I do things works for me, but you may find that there's a method that works better for you, and that's what you want to use when you work. So now I can right click in this area and choose Create Motion Tween. And now that took that frame span and turned it to a tween span, so now we have my name here. So at this point, I am going to click on the name, and I'm going to apply a filter to it. And the filter is going to be a blur filter, because that's just a nice kind of effect. And 5 isn't very much, so I'll stretch it out. And you can see, look at that. Ooh. So you can drag the blur. So it's going to blur. If I just completely blur it out and then go in about a second here, and now at this point, if I just click on it and pull it back down, we should see now. So it starts out, blurs in, stays for a little bit. Now to get the keyframe here, so then I can go to the end and have it do the final blur out. To pull that off, what I need to do is I need to hit F6 on the keyboard, or what I need to do is click on it, and then if I kind of adjust it like that, then it automatically puts that keyframe in. So, but I need that keyframe so it sits. So then when I hit the end here, I can then blur it out. And we can see now we have this. So it pops in, pops out. Ooh. It's fancy now. I'm impressed. And I'm going to save this. We'll run it and see the best movie you've never seen. Fades out. My name pops in. Goes out a little bit slower. Now it's going out slower because if we study what's happening in the timeline here, we'll notice that the number of frames it took to come in is about 1/3 the number of frames it took for the name to come out. So if I want to adjust that, then I need to make an adjustment to these individual keyframes and where they're occurring. But if I just click in the timeline, it doesn't select a keyframe, it selects the entire tween span, that whole section of that tween. So I don't want to select the whole tween span, I want to choose an individual keyframe and move its position. So I can accomplish that by holding down the Command key on the Mac, Control on Windows, and then I can move that one frame. So that allows me just to move one frame. And then if I want to shorten my entire tween span just so it's not on screen so long, I can just pull the whole thing down, and that does what it refers to as proportional keyframes, where it adjusts the keyframes to kind of fit them to how much the total time was, and now it narrows them down a little bit. But I know I want it a little bit longer. So let's run this again and see how it looks. Title, name comes in, name pops out. It's still taking a little longer than I would like on the pop out. So I'm going to just pull that over, hold down Command, click on that keyframe, shorten that up so now it should have a little more snap when it disappears. Animation's about timing. It's about adjusting that timing so you get, see, I like that better. It's got a little more speed to it. It feels a little more urgent. It's not so slow and drawn out. It's not plodding. I like that better. Okay. So now that I have accomplished that, I know I don't want to leave, 3 seconds of black afterward. I only want to have about a second of black before I start moving into the next part of my project. So if I just highlight the frames that are there and then hold down the Shift key, I can hit F5 on the keyboard, and that removes the frames that were highlighted. So if you ever end up with frames you don't want, you highlight the frames you don't want, hold down Shift, hit F5, they go away. The same way that hitting F5 adds frames, Shift F5 will make the frames go away. So this is the first aspect of getting our title parts, getting the introduction, getting your project started. Now you don't have to have a black background, of course. You could put an image in, you could make it look a little bit nicer, or you might want to do your credits on black, or you could have some animation running in the background while your credits are playing. So there's a lot of options available to you with what you could do with that.